Okay, good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure to chair the last session of the conference. Passing so quickly, but still we have four very fascinating papers to listen to. Let me just give you the brief plan. First of the speakers will be presenting here, live from the auditory hall from the new campus of Feliks Nowowiejski Academy of Music in Bydgoszcz. And then two other ones will be connecting with us online. Let me introduce our first speaker, Miss Amanda Wolschleger from the USA. Let me just tell you that Miss Amanda is a doctoral student at Temple University in Philadelphia. She previously graduated from McGill University in Canada, and her previous work explored recontextualization as a musical memory in Chopin's mazurkas, which I guess will be presented in her today's paper, which is titled Żywe wspomnienia, Examining Frédéric Chopin's Opus 17, number 4, Mazurka in A minor as a musical memory. Please welcome Miss Amanda Wolschleger.
Dzień dobry, witam I dziękuję.
And thank you for the wonderful introduction. Don't worry, the presentation will be in English. My Polish is not that good yet. So, as Malvina said, we will be talking about Frédéric Chopin's Opus 17, number 4, Mazurka in A minor as a musical memory. And now I know for this particular audience, the introduction on what are mazurkas is probably a little bit redundant, but we will go ahead and do that anyway, just to make sure. And then we will talk about specific sections of Opus 17, number 4, and how it relates to different sections of Opus 6, number 3, and then we'll finish with some conclusions. So, to begin, Chopin's mazurkas are in ternary form and 3/4 meter, and they are generally considered to incorporate elements of 3 different kinds of Polish folk dances. So we have the mazur, which features accents on beats 2 and or 3, and a descendental rhythm, which essentially means that it just starts with a smaller subdivision and then slows down throughout the measure, as you can see in the first example up there. And then we also have the oberek, which is related to the verb phrase obracać się, to turn. And as you can see, musically, sometimes these are depicted with actual turn figures and also triplets. And then the third is the kujawiak, which is generally applied to sections of the mazurkas that are very melancholy in minor keys and feature this sort of swaying kind of melodic line, as you can see here. However, as Helena Goldberg has argued, applying the term kujawiak to these sections is actually anachronistic and probably would not have been thought of in that way by Chopin himself. And so she argues that these sections of music are better conceptualized as musical depictions of nostalgia. And while I agree with Goldberg, I view these nostalgic sections through the framework of memory. So we will get into that now. So my reading of these mazurkas is intertextual in that I compare mazurkas from different opuses to each other. And I talk about the connections between them. Now, Jeffrey Kohlberg has also spoken about connections between mazurkas, but his are specifically within a single opus. And in this discussion, he states that Chopin never employs obvious thematic links between numbers. Cyclic thematic associations, motivic derivations, mottos, and ciphers do not constitute part of his compositional vocabulary. If a musical parameter acts to draw together the various numbers, it must operate on a level more subtle than thematic recollection. And although this seems to argue against connecting the mazurkas in the way that I do, actually, it reinforces my connections because I've underlined some keywords here. Never obvious and more subtle. The way in which Chopin does this is not initially apparent on the surface, but once you start to look at them and really analyze these different mazurkas, it starts to become more obvious. So we are going to start in the middle of Opus 17, number 4, with the B section, which features the most noticeable connection to Opus 6, number 3. So first we will hear Opus 6, number 3, the excerpt which is on the top, and listen in particular for the highlighted notes. I'm hoping you can see the colors well on the screen. And you will notice that I have highlighted almost the exact same notes in Opus 17, number 4, moved up an octave and placed in the key of A major instead of E major, which sounds like this. And as you hopefully heard, melodically, the connection is very, very audible. However, the differences between these two examples are that in Opus 6, number 3, we see a lot of very specific, detailed articulations. We have the portato, we have the accents, the staccatissimo, and all of these details represent the clarity of an initial experience. Whereas in Opus 17, number 4, we have lost all of these detailed articulations. Instead, we have these smooth legato lines and this lovely inner voice, and all of this reinforces the kind of nostalgic quality that this section of 17/4 features. And I'm not the only person to notice this about 17, number 4. Although she makes no connection to Opus 6, number 3, or any specific references to any other mazurkas, Barbara Malewski states that the B section is paradoxically the most comforting moment in the piece. She says that it is readily... Sorry about that. It is readily comprehensible as a representation of something distant yet most familiar, an acoustic trace of some other time and place left behind. And that because the disruption acts as a recovered musical fragment, a remembrance of the past, of home, of Poland, it can only be idealized, its contours smoothed, to suggest a simple, age-old perfection. And so we can see that all of these descriptions fit with interpreting 17/4 as a musical memory. And we've just seen the actual musical evidence to support that as well. But that section isn't the only place where we see connections. So if we look at the next 4 bars of Opus 6, number 3, we get this. And as you can see, in 17/4, we take the notes in blue, the arpeggiated E major triad, and 17/4 fills that in and extends it over a longer period of time so that we get this. And in addition to that, both examples utilize a major second between scale degrees 4 and 5, which in Opus 6, number 3, is this. And in 17/4 is, which further reinforces these two sections of music. And the final connection here that I want to point out are these thirds. So in 6/3, we have and in 17/4, we separate the first one, and then the second is still stacked. And this points to a larger formal connection between these two segments of music as well. So Opus 6/3, number 3, begins with a 4-bar introduction, and then we get what appears to be a sentence structure with a basic idea, a repetition of that basic idea, and then a continuation, which then takes a portion of the ending and repeats that with an extension that allows it to modulate to B major, which is where we start in the next section of the music. And within that, we see, again, these thirds here and this pedal on the tonic. So moving on to 17/4, we see that we also have a sentence structure, basic idea, repetition of that basic idea, continuation. We've lost the detail of the extended repetition that helps us modulate, and instead what we get is this continuation that utilizes the thirds from 6/3 to loop back to the beginning of this material. So that sounds like. And I will play that ending once more because that was not particularly good. I think that time you probably heard it a little better. So, looking in more detail at the beginning of 17/4, because we were focused on the B section, we continue to see more connections between these mazurkas. So, after a 4-bar introduction in 17/4, we get this opening theme. And if we look at that a little more closely, we can see that this opening idea an ascending third, B to D, actually reverses the direction of motion of the motive from 6/3. So within this descent, we have a third outlined from D sharp to B natural. So So we've lost the sharp to account for the key change, which also moves it from major to minor. So in 17/4, it's minor, it's more nostalgic, and the ascending motion creates a feeling of struggle, longing, and effort. And then as the music progresses, we get the full sixth. So 17/4 transforms what is a jaunty little descent in 6/3 into a struggle to remember and to recover this point in the past. And just like the previous examples, we lose the details of articulation that we had in 6/3 that are representative of an initial experience in favor of this smoothed out legato motion that represents this nostalgia and longing for the past. And continuing to look at the A section of 17/4 and comparing that with the A section of 6/3, we see more connections. So I've already pointed out these thirds in a couple different examples. And here in the purple note heads, we can see that once again, 17/4 takes vertical thirds and then makes them melodic thirds. So becomes and again, changing from major to minor to create the appropriate affect. And further reinforcing that is the harmony, which is not exactly the same, but in 6/3 we get E major, and in 17/4 we also get E major, or E minor, but it's in first inversion. And then same thing in the next measure, not exactly the same context, but very similar. So we've looked at the B section of 17/4 and the A section of 6/3. We've looked at the A section of 17/4 and the A section of 6/3. But now we're going to take a look at the A section of 17/4 and the B section of 6/3. So we have and in 17/4 we lose some of the notes and they're replaced by accents, but we get something very similar, once again adjusted to account for the minor key. So apart from the B section of the piece, these examples on the board right now are the longest and most obvious connection between these two mazurkas. So in Opus 6, number 3, you'll see I've highlighted some notes in purple, and those are a chromatic descent from scale degrees 5 to sharp 4 to natural 4. And that repeats several times. And in 17/4, you'll see that we get the exact same chromatic descent from 5, sharp 4, natural 4, which again repeats multiple times, twice in the first 4-bar phrase, just as in 6/3. And this is paired with a harmonic pedal and a melodic pedal in both examples. And what's striking about this is that rather than transposing the pedals, Chopin keeps them exactly the same. So it's E and B in both examples. In 17/4. And just so you can hear these in isolation a little bit, in 6/3, it's and in 17/4, it's and then of course the pedal what you'll notice is that the melodic pedal is rhythmically offset from the harmonic pedal, and it's the exact same sort of displacement going on in 17/4, although the exact relationship is somewhat different. And this one is much more difficult to separate out that way, particularly when I can't see exactly what I'm doing. All right, so. So you can see that it's also rhythmically displaced from the harmonic pedal. So if we sort of sum up the entire process of Opus 17, number 4, as a memory relating to 6/3, we get something like an A section where these little memory fragments start to accumulate, and then we get this very large obetic fragment further on after we've had these little fragments, which is the sort of closest we get to 6/3 until we get to the B section, which serves as a reliving of the past. So we are temporally transported from the present to the past, and we get 4 presentations of that basic idea. If I play the correct music. So we get 4 iterations of that section, and the 4th time it is cut off abruptly, and this serves to rather jarringly return us to the present, where we get a recap of the A section, and then also a coda. And what this coda does is that by the time we get to the introductory material, which is exactly the same at the end of the piece as the very beginning, it's as if the music has gone through this very intense emotional process and then sort of cried itself out of all of these emotions, but instead of being the sort of catharsis that makes us feel better at the end, because we've worked everything out and now we can move on, it's an empty catharsis. We've cried all the tears out, but we don't feel better. Now we just feel empty. And so what we can do is we can then expand this to a more general process that can be applied to other mazurkas. So we have an A section in a minor key that represents, as Jared Dunn says in his tone-based mazurka modules, the miserable present, and which for me include details of recontextualization that communicate the specific types of memory processes involved. So in this one, it's a struggle and a longing to remember, which is then realized when we reach the B section, which is in a major key and represents, according to Dunn, the beautiful past. And then in the A section, we return to the present. And so I focused on Opus 17, number 4, and Opus 6, number 3. But there are other mazurkas that do seem to present similar relationships with each other. And so future work involves looking into those in more detail to sort of refine these generalizations about the way recontextualization serves as musical memory in this music. Dziękuję. Thank you. And my 20 million references.
Okay, so thank you very much for this presentation, Amanda. We are slowly running out of time, but I guess if we have a question, we may accommodate one or two, so I'm opening the floor. Do we have any questions? Would anybody like to ask about anything? I don't see any volunteers. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. You sort of said that there is a possibility. You've chosen on two particular mazurkas, which you gave a very eloquent account of, and you think it's possible that you could find others as well. I'm wondering, is it because Chopin is consciously self-referencing, or is it basically because he's writing mazurkas and that's how mazurkas behave? If you see what I mean. At least when he composes them. Yeah.
Yes. So, I mean, certainly some of the similarities that occur in these things can be broken down into, you know, this is what the music does. And it's a generic connection based on that. However, I think it's examples like this, where we have a combination of transposition going on with the 5♯4 natural 4, paired with the repetition of the exact same pitches, that feels far less like an example of this is just what an oberek does, and a lot more something that's intentional. Of course, it's, you know, saying, oh, he specifically did this and meant them to be memories is perhaps a little too much, considering he's never written about that. But the number of times that people have discussed these mazurkas and Chopin's music more generally in terms of memory and nostalgia, and calling these mazurkas his most intimate pieces and referring to them as his diary. I think these sorts of connections provide an analytical, score-based kind of evidence that supports those kinds of statements about this music and how personal it was to him.
Sure, no, I totally accept that, because I think one of the things about analysis is that it finds things that are there, and definitely are there, which the composer wasn't necessarily aware of. I mean, if you think about the whole question of Schenkerian analysis, I'm quite sure that the people that Schenker analysed had absolutely no idea about backgrounds, foregrounds, and middle grounds. It was all imposed on it, but that doesn't invalidate it.
Exactly.
It's because the analyst has done their job. So I think that's fine.
Okay, we have one more question from Professor Nowak.
Maybe some remark. Thank you for your analysis and interpretations Chopin's mazurkas. Your voice, this new voice, when we consider the issue of Chopin's style, individual style, Chopin idiomatic language. I remind very important for us in Poland book, monograph of Chopin's music. His author was Professor Mieczysław Tomaszewski.
Oczywiście.
He wrote about Chopin's style, and she pointed out Chopin's toposes in music. Maybe this is an element of toposes also. Maybe. But when we pointed out first example, could you...
Maybe we can get back, yes. We can
no, late.
The previous one.
Moment. Not.
The first one?
Not this desk, next. Next.
I think it's the definition.
Next. Not this piece. Oh yes, here. We see topos, one of the Chopin very important toposes. This is a figure which contains 6 first and first step of this figure. This is the second example, ascending 6.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the sixth is a very important figure for Chopin, and I mean, I believe it was Jean-Jacques Eigeldinger who pointed out the motive of a sixth falling to a fifth in every single one of the preludes. So yes, there's a lot of connection between some of the things I'm talking about here in the mazurkas and others of Chopin's work. But something I have not had a chance to dig into as much as I would like to, which is why it's not here, is actually connections between works from non-mazurka genres and the mazurkas. So, for example, I hear connections between the Fourth Ballade and the posthumous Opus 68 F minor mazurka. And this is sort of speculation on my part, based on the things I've seen that I haven't been able to look at thoroughly yet. But my suspicion is that when there are connections between the mazurkas and things that are not mazurkas, those are more closely dependent on being in the same key, and they're not functioning in such a narrative way to shape the entire piece. They really are just like these fragments and allusions, whereas in the mazurkas, the relationships between them serve a much more large-scale narrative that can be applied to the music. But like I said, that's kind of what I'm going to dig into in my doctoral dissertation. So yes, thank you.
Thank you for your explanations. Thank you.
Okay, I guess we'll need to wrap it up, and I don't see any other raised hands. So thank you very much, Amanda, and yeah, thank you. And yes, and please let me welcome the next speaker, our next presenter, Ms. Daria Kondraciuk. Please let me just say, yes, please come here. Ms. Daria Kondraciuk from Warsaw. She holds degrees from both Warsaw University and Frederick Chopin University of Music in music theory, musicology, as well as Polish philology. The research interests of Ms. Daria Kondraciuk include the paratextuality of new music, contemporary sacred music, and the relationship between music and politics. Today, we are going to hear the paper titled Sampling and its Paratexts in New Polish Music. A few reflections on Natier's theory of musical semiotics and Jeanette's theory of paratextuality.
Okay.
Yeah, is everything working?
Yes, everything's all right. I just have one musical example here. Okay, we can also.
Yeah. If
I
everything's fine.
also have it right here.
Okay.
Yeah, it will be all right. Thank you. I will be speaking in Polish, but my presentation is in English. So let's start. Szanowni Państwo, w mojej prezentacji skupię się na samplingu i paratekstach. Będę mówić o muzyce nowej, czyli o najnowszych kompozycjach polskich twórców, które prezentowane są na festiwalach muzyki nowej i różnych tego typu wydarzeniach. To pozwala je sklasyfikować jako należące do tej tradycji. W moim referacie łączę trochę teorii Natier z teorią Jeanetta i chciałabym zacząć od właśnie przykładu muzycznego, którego mam nadzieję wysłuchamy sobie tak, żeby nie widzieć, co jest na razie na wideo na YouTubie, więc tak powinno być. I wysłuchamy go sobie od 11 minuty 32 sekundy. Tutaj. Chciałam zacząć w ten niestandardowy sposób, żeby wykorzystać trochę element zaskoczenia. Słyszeliśmy właśnie fragment Totentanz z 2022 roku Rafała Ryterskiego, w którym z muzyką łączą się nagrania wykonane na ulicy. Nagrania te mają wiele nazw. Dźwięki konkretne, found footage, pozamuzyczny materiał dźwiękowy, czy też sampling, wykorzystanie materiału zewnętrznego jako nagrań w muzyce w tradycji partyturowej. Równolegle z muzyką mogliśmy usłyszeć szum, tupot, szelest, wołania. Można powiedzieć, że hałas i każdy z nas inaczej by określił to, co właśnie usłyszał. A jak wskazuje kompozytor, zarówno w partyturze, jak i w napisach zamieszczonych na nagraniu, były to dźwięki audiosfery konkretnych protestów. Protestów Black Lives Matter, protestów kobiet, białoruskich protestów antyrządowych i protestów antywojennych w Rosji. Co będzie widoczne na następnym slajdzie. I tutaj widzimy właśnie to wideo na YouTubie, gdzie podczas tego, co słyszeliśmy, jest wyświetlany ten zapis. Włączenie do utworu dźwięków demonstracji ulicznych jest jedną ze strategii artystycznych, które sprawiają, że to ten tanc zyskuje wyraźny charakter polityczny. Stanowi przykład twórczości zaangażowanej. Odtworzony przed chwilą przykład ukazuje dwie rzeczy. Po pierwsze, dźwięki te, nagrane i odtwarzane, dźwięki konkretne, dźwięki nieinstrumentalne, niektórzy powiedzieliby, że dźwięki niemuzyczne, czy po prostu fragmenty audiosfery. Dźwięki te włączone w utwór muzyczny są ontologicznie związane ze światem pozamuzycznym, z uwagi na ich źródło czy kontekst wykonania nagrania. Włączanie ich do utworu może poszerzać możliwości dyskursywne muzyki i może być jedną ze strategii tworzenia utworów heteroreferencjalnych, czyli odnoszących się do omawianych już podczas naszej konferencji kwestii pozamuzycznych. Po drugie, przykład ten ukazuje, że pewne właściwości dźwięku odtwarzanego są przed nami ukryte i mogą być ujawniane w paratekstach. Z tego względu teoria paratekstualności Gérarda Geneta jest szczególnie przydatna do opisania tego, w jaki sposób sampling muzyczny ma charakter znaczeniotwórczy. W najprostszej definicji parateksty to teksty poboczne wobec tekstu głównego, które wpływają na jego interpretację. Kurują one też relację pomiędzy dziełem a odbiorcą, a także negują samowystarczalność tekstu głównego, czyli w przypadku tego materiału warstwy dźwiękowej utworu. Co więcej, silne sparatekstualizowanie dzieła przez autora narzuca dynamikę relacji pomiędzy autorem a odbiorcą, w której to twórca przyjmuje rolę opiekuna tekstu, gdyż o własnym dziele wie najwięcej, a odbiorca staje się niejako intruzem wobec tegoż tekstu, którego interpretacją należy pokierować. Wróćmy jednak do samej charakterystyki samplingu w utworze muzycznym należącym do tradycji muzyki komponowanej, czyli tradycji, w której partytura rozumiana jest jako system znaków i jest podstawowym nośnikiem dzieła. Sampling to proces integrowania w utworze muzycznym istniejącego wcześniej nagranego materiału dźwiękowego. Charakteryzuje go więc silna intertekstualność, choć ma ona inny charakter niż w przypadku cytatu muzycznego. O ile cytat zakłada ponowne odtworzenie zapożyczonego materiału na podstawie jego zapisu partyturowego, sampling bezpośrednio włącza do utworu oryginalne nagranie. Pomija więc etap subiektywnej lub niedokładnej transkrypcji, koniecznej, gdy cytowany materiał nie ma zapisu partyturowego, i pomija też etap zapośredniczenia materiału oryginalnego przez jego wykonanie. Zamiast tego bezpośrednio włącza do utworu oryginalny obiekt dźwiękowy, sound object, o którym pisał Nattier, który pozostaje jednocześnie zewnętrznym, jak i wewnętrznym wobec integrującego go w sobie dzieła. Włączenie samplingu do twórczości muzycznej, której podstawowym nośnikiem jest partytura, wiąże się oczywiście z koniecznością ustanowienia dla sampli odpowiednich form partyturowego zapisu. Ze względów praktycznych konieczne jest zamieszczenie w partyturze informacji o tym, w jakim momencie utworu sample ma być odtworzony. Precyzowanie zaś, co jest w nim zawarte, bez względu na to, czy jest to pozamuzyczny materiał dźwiękowy, materiał muzyczny czy wypowiedź, nie jest dla wykonania utworu konieczne. W ten sposób zawartość klipów dźwiękowych można w partyturze ukryć lub ujawnić, a decyzja ta, poza jej wymiarem praktycznym, takim jak ułatwienie wykonawcom czytania partytury, ma wymiar komunikacyjny i interpretacyjny. O specyfice dźwięku samplowanego pisał m.in. Pierre Schaeffer. Wskazywał, że dźwięk oderwany od swego źródła staje się obiektem dźwiękowym, którym można manipulować, co szczegółowo opisał w traktacie o obiektach muzycznych. Jean-Jacques Nattier schaefferowski obiekt dźwiękowy widzi jako idealny przykład dźwięku na jego poziomie neutralnym, czyli poziomie tego, co słyszalne. Podkreśla przy tym, że pewne cechy dźwięku mogą być słyszalne, choć niezamierzone, lub zamierzone, choć niesłyszalne. W ramach semiotyki muzycznej Nattier na poziomie neutralnym, inaczej, na poziomie śladu, sample traktowany byłby jako obiektywna struktura dźwiękowa, wyodrębniona z pierwotnego kontekstu i zintegrowana w nową kompozycję. Na poziomie poiesis, znaku, intencja twórcza odgrywa kluczową rolę i nadaje strukturom muzycznym znaczenie zależne od koncepcji autora. Na poziomie aistesis zaś semantyzacja struktur dźwiękowych zachodzi dzięki słuchaczowi, który, jeśli rozpozna cytat, aluzję, sygnał czy symbol, może nadać mu znaczenie w oparciu o sytuację komunikacyjną oraz własne doświadczenia kulturowe czy artystyczne. I teraz chciałabym przejść do przykładów wykorzystania i opisania sampli w kilku najnowszych utworach muzycznych. Pierwszy będzie już znany Państwu Totentanz. Totentanz, który miał premierę podczas finału warszawskiej jesieni 3 lata temu. W partyturze utworu kompozytor zawarł obszerny komentarz ujawniający polityczny charakter dzieła. Omawiał tam kwestie, które następnie tematyzował konsekwentnie w utworze. A dotyczyły one kryzysu klimatycznego, przemocy wobec osób LGBT, neokolonializmu, korporacjonalizmu, zdrowia psychicznego i pandemii, czyli zdiagnozowanych przez kompozytora problemów współczesności. Problemy te, jak wskazuje Ryterski, w tym właśnie autokomentarzu, mają po raz pierwszy dotyczyć każdego, co stanowi jedno z odwołań do toposu Danse Macabre i stanowi też przewodnią ideę utworu. W dziele tym konsekwentnie stosowane są różne odniesienia do podejmowanych w tym tekście tematów. Ryterski zapożycza materiał z kanonu muzyki komponowanej w formie cytatów muzycznych, aluzji, reminiscencji, przywołuje m.in. Dies Irae, Marsz Żałobny, polonez przypisywany Ogińskiemu, Pawanę na śmierć infantki czy Lament Dydony. Włącza także do utworu istniejący już nagrany przez niego materiał dźwiękowy, fragmenty nagrań protestów, skompilowane głosy, urywki wypowiedzi medialnych czy fragment filmu dokumentalnego. Treść wykorzystanych sampli kompozytor opisuje bezpośrednio nad partyturową partią audio. Tutaj. A źródła zintegrowanego w utworze materiału dźwiękowego ujawnia też w opisie do nagrania utworu w serwisie YouTube. Co ciekawe, w przeciwieństwie do tak szczegółowego opisania sampli i ich zawartości, w żaden sposób nie wyróżnia on licznych cytatów muzycznych. W ich przypadku pozwala odbiorcy na samodzielne odkrywanie intertekstów. Tak więc to są różne rodzaje paratekstów dotyczących sampli u Ryterskiego. A teraz przejdźmy do kolejnego kompozytora młodszego pokolenia, Jacka Sotomskiego i jego utworu Pepe is Pepe. Główną inspiracją utworu Sotomskiego był internetowy mem Pepe, o którym kompozytor wypowiadał się następująco. Byłem bardzo zaniepokojony tym, jak głupie memy mogły stać się bronią w debacie politycznej i jak przekształciły się w symbol nienawiści. Tytuł utworu jest parafrazą słynnego wersu Rose is a rose, is a rose, is a rose z wiersza Sacred Emily Gertrude Stein, w którym to kompozytor widzi odpowiedź na instrumentalizację treści internetowych w celach politycznych. Omawiany utwór Sotomskiego, jak i inna jego twórczość, ma silny wymiar duchologiczny lub też hauntologiczny. By go wyeksponować, kompozytor chętnie sięga po efemeryczne treści internetowe. Wyrywki artykułów, komentarzy i dyskusji, reklamy, memy czy dźwięki z gier komputerowych. Odniesienia do ulotnych treści pojawiają się w sferze wizualnej utworu, co widzimy tutaj. Jest to wyświetlanie za wykonawcami obrazów lub też klipów wideo, a także pojawiają się w sferze dźwiękowej, w tym jako sample. Niektóre z paratekstów dotyczących sampli pełnią funkcję informatywną, ujawniają pochodzenie materiału lub zwracają uwagę na te cechy dźwięku, które, jak wspominał Natie, są nierozpoznawalne. Inne nazwy lub opisy sampli poza funkcją informacyjną pełnią też funkcję ewaluatywną, jak w przypadku określenia jednego z sampli słowem muzak. Lub wskazują też na odwołania do różnych idiomów stylistycznych, jak na przykład zapis Polish Hip Hop Playing. W tabeli z samplami kompozytor wskazuje, jaki materiał zintegrował w swoim dziele. Między innymi widzimy tutaj akord z symfonii Mahlera, motyw muzyczny będzie też motyw muzyczny z Kaczych opowieści, czy przetworzony elektronicznie fragment piosenki Heroes Davida Bowiego. Co istotne, korpus główny tej partytury nie wskazuje na wykorzystanie jakichkolwiek sampli. Wynika to z tego, że partia samplera zapisana została za pomocą zwykłych nut, a powiązania pomiędzy klawiszami urządzenia i klipami audio ujawnione zostały w aneksie do utworu. Podobnie jak włączone do utworu wizualia, teksty do melorecytacji i informacje o innych odniesieniach pozamuzycznych. Sampler odgrywa w tym utworze rolę szczególną. Jego kolejnym klawiszom przypisano kolejne klipy. Tak jak wspominałam, dzięki temu, gdy wykonawca naciska klawisz, na przykład C, raz kreślne, z głośników wybrzmiewa dźwięk. Do klawisza C przypisany jest akord Mahlera, a za wykonawcami wyświetlany jest obraz. Występuje tu więc zmieniona relacja znaczonego i znaczącego. Signifiant, nuta C raz kreślonego, oddzielony jest od swojego pierwotnego signifie, dźwięku C, a zamiast tego powiązany jest z nagraniem i obrazem naraz. Parateksty wykorzystywane przez Sotomskiego to więc spis sampli i tabela z samplami i są one wyłącznie w formie aneksowej. Można jednak zapytać, czy zamieszczanie w partyturze paratekstów dotyczących nagranego materiału dźwiękowego nie jest wytłumaczone względami praktycznymi? Znajomość zawartości sampli ułatwia pracę wykonawców i sprawia, że lektura partytury daje nam zarys tego, o czym jest utwór. W końcu dla sampli zapis partyturowy jest wtórny, więc opisanie w partyturze ich treści upodabnia je do cytatów muzycznych, które możemy odczytać i zrozumieć bez konieczności ich usłyszenia. Proponuję więc pewien kontrargument. Utwór It's Fine, Isn't It Pawła Szymańskiego ukazuje, że zrezygnowanie z paratekstów dotyczących sampla ukrywa heteroreferencjalność utworu. Pozwala wykorzystać aspekt zaskoczenia oparty na tym, że dzieło muzyczne ma charakter procesualny i ujawnia się przed nami w pełni właśnie w trakcie jego wykonania. Prawykonanie utworu miało odbyć się podczas festiwalu Eufonie, lecz zostało odwołane z powodu odkrycia przez organizatorów politycznego znaczenia dzieła. Pod koniec utworu odtwarzana ma być z boomboxa przetwarzana elektronicznie wypowiedź Jarosława Kaczyńskiego. Nas nie przekonają, że czarne jest czarne, a białe jest białe. A w trakcie tego następuje huk wystrzału. Według Mieczysława Kominka, przewodniczącego Rady Programowej Festiwalu, miał to być dźwięk wystrzału z pistoletu. Tymczasem kompozytor tłumaczył mediom, że dźwięk ten wydawał kapiszon lub pukawka, opisana zresztą w partyturze jako a toy gun, a loud one. Tak więc samo sedno tego, co wybrzmiało w partyturze, dotyczy nie tyle dźwięku, co opisujących go paratekstów. Samo nagranie wypowiedzi polityka nie zostało szczególnie wyróżnione w partyturze, co widać na poniższym przykładzie nutowym. W partyturze zapisano wyłącznie czas trwania nagrania, a w spisie instrumentów umieszczano adnotację. Płyta CD z efektami dźwiękowymi zostanie dostarczona wraz z materiałami do wykonania. Po odtworzeniu zawartości płyty komisja programowa odwołała wykonanie, twierdząc, że organizatorzy czują się wprowadzeni w błąd i głęboko rozczarowani postawą kompozytora. Polityczność utworu Szymańskiego konstytuują więc relacje międzyznakowe pomiędzy trzema elementami paratekstowymi. Heteroreferencjalnym tytułem It's Fine, Isn't It, wypowiedzią odtwarzaną z taśmy, czyli właśnie samplem, i dźwiękiem wystrzału, czyli dźwiękiem konkretnym. W ramach podsumowania przygotowałam też taką tabelę, gdzie starałam się podzielić te sample na różne ich rodzaje. Parateksty dotyczące sampli na różne ich rodzaje i zrobiłam to na 3 poziomach. Pierwszym poziomem jest poziom, który odpowiada na pytanie, jak parateksty ujawniają się odbiorcy i kiedy wpływają na interpretację. Wyróżniłam tutaj parateksty obiektowe. Są to takie, które mają charakter stały i dałam im też taką nazwę antycypacyjny. Oczywiście z takimi paratekstami o charakterze obiektu możemy się zapoznać też po wykonaniu i wtedy mogą one wstecznie zmieniać to, jak myślimy o utworze lub zmieniać to, jak myślimy o następnym wykonaniu. I wyróżniłam też parateksty performatywne, czyli te, które pojawiają się w trakcie wykonania utworu muzycznego. I są to na przykład te napisy, które wyświetlają się podczas wykonywania utworów ryterskiego i sotomskiego. Drugi poziom to jest to, gdzie parateksty obiektowe się znajdują. I możemy tutaj wyróżnić parateksty, które znajdują się w partyturze i te, które znajdują się poza partyturą. Bo o takich dodatkowych, odautorskich znaczeniach, które przypisywane są samplom, kompozytorzy mogą nas informować również w jakichś komentarzach, notach programowych, książeczkach płytowych czy wypowiedziach medialnych. I w klasycznym ujęciu Żeneta byłby to podział na peryteksty, czyli te teksty bliskie tekstowi głównemu, oraz parateksty dalsze. Epiteksty, czyli te dalsze. I trzeci poziom to jest to, gdzie w partyturze umieszczone są te parateksty. I wyróżniłam tutaj parateksty aneksowe, spis sampli, tabela z samplami, te, które pojawiały się u Sotomskiego, a także parateksty przy tekście głównym, te, które szczególnie były wyeksponowane w utworze ryterskiego. Przykłady utworów Rafała Ryterskiego i Jacka Sotomskiego w świetle teorii semiotycznej Natie ukazują, że sample nie są jedynie nośnikami idei kompozytorskich, lecz uwikłane są w skomplikowaną grę zamierzonych znaczeń i dostępnych odczytań, w której autorzy za pomocą paratekstów starają się nakierować odbiorców na autorskie interpretacje, czym odsłaniają poziom poetyczny dzieła. I to wszystko z mojej strony. Dziękuję Państwu za uwagę.
Bardzo dziękujemy za przedstawienie referatu. Thank you very much. Zapraszam Państwa do krótkiej dyskusji. Widzę pytania. Pani profesor Nowak, pani profesor habilitowana Małgorzata Lisecka. Proszę, proszę.
Dziękuję za bardzo ciekawą interpretację kompozycji, które są bardzo złożone, bardzo wielowarstwowe. Tutaj również jest kwestia relacji między różnymi typami sztuk. I ja bym chciała jeszcze zwrócić Pani uwagę, że jest jeszcze jedna możliwość interpretowania z punktu widzenia teorii Geneta. Bo jeżeli spojrzymy na funkcję sampli w gotowym, już w finalnym dziele, to sample nie są paratekstami, tylko są albo hipotekstami, albo są intertekstami, bo paratekst według Geneta to jest tytuł na przykład, to jest komentarz, czyli coś, co nie wchodzi do utworu, a to, co już jest częścią utworu, a sample są częścią utworu, to jest jeszcze jedna kolejna interpretacja, która się tutaj otwiera. Czy Pani też tą interpretację badała?
Tak, to przepraszam. W takim razie niewyraźnie się wyraziłam, bo mi chodziło o parateksty językowe, które dotyczą
rozumiem.
samplingu muzycznego. Rzeczywiście sample są same w sobie już intertekstami,
Tak,
bo są z innego tekstu. Albo pani powiedziała, że też
Z punktu widzenia utworu.
Tak, bo już są, już są w ramach tej dźwiękowości utworu zawarte. A tutaj badałam parateksty, które są nie w medium muzycznym, nie w medium dźwiękowym, a w medium językowym, czyli to, co czytamy w partyturze, to, co czytamy na ekranie, a co dotyczy sampli.
Czyli widać, jak wielozłożone są te kompozycje i jak wiele perspektyw trzeba tutaj przyjmować.
Tak, zdecydowanie.
Tak.
Dlatego przyjęłam tutaj taką perspektywę utworu jako tekstu polisemiotycznego, na który składa się nie tylko to, co wybrzmiewa, ale też to, co jest ograniczone innymi medialnościami.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Tak, widzę, że mamy jeszcze jedno pytanie. Bardzo proszę.
Two very short questions. Can I? Okay, so in Polish or in English?
Both are good.
Okay, so thank you very much. First of all, it was really super interesting, and thank you for Jeanette and also for Derrida. My first question is about you told that you used these three names like sample, concrete music, and found footage. Correct me if I'm wrong. There are three names for the same phenomenon. Yes. Or there are three different objects?
They're a bit different because
Okay.
That's the question, right?
The first question, yeah.
So when we talk about the concrete music, we think about the music that is performed, for example, live on stage, but it's performed on non-instruments.
Yes, this I know, but like you told us, we can call this thing like with three names, and you enlisted these three names. So this is the reason I thought you mean that this is the same phenomenon under three names. But it's not exactly the same, right?
Not exactly the same, but one characteristic is the same, that the source of the sound has an extra musical meaning in all three of those sounds.
Yes, phenomena.
Yeah,
Okay, and speaking of Derrida and hauntology, because when Derrida talks about hauntology, he refers not to, like he talks not about all types of references to the past, but it has to be some special type of reference which is synced in some kind of nostalgia connected to our past or an individual past or generation past or something like this. So this is what I wanted to ask you about, because when you use this name, this meaning of hauntology, talking about Sotomski's piece, I wanted to ask you if you think that this reference in his piece has this aspect, this this value of nostalgia and something like this.
Yes, of course, because Sotomski is a composer born in 1986, I think.
Yes.
So when he references the cartoons from the 90s or the computer games from that period, he talks about his childhood, and when he incorporates in his works a lot of those internet memes or internet discourse, it's from 2010s or something like that, so it's from also his younger years, and I find this aspect of nostalgia in his work really important. Yeah.
Ontological. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, I think we have another question.
Clear up the term footage film. Małgosia or Magda, footage film. It is more connected with cinematography than music, and now it is very popular name for a documentary titled Trains by Maciej Drygas and with music by Paweł Szymański.
The microphone. Okay, so I'm just checking if there are any other questions, remarks. I think no, so I guess let's thank Ms.
Thank
Daria
you.
for her paper. Ms. Daria Kondraciuk. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I guess I need to switch seats for the second part of our last session of the conference. When we are going to have two online speakers. Okay. Okay. The next paper, the author of the next paper is Miss Edna Hollywell. Czy ja ją mam tutaj, czy nie? Let me maybe introduce, because as far as I know, that's a pre-recorded material, which Miss Edna Hollywell sent us, so we'll be watching her presentation. Let me just introduce the speaker. Miss Edna Hollywell has scholarly affiliations to the universities of Oxford and London, United Kingdom, where her research focuses on allegory, character, and historical reception. Her work explores how myth, gender, and politics intersect in English opera and how these dynamics are reinterpreted across time. Miss Edna Hollywell has published widely in peer-reviewed journals, and she is also a peer reviewer. She's a member of the Royal Musical Association and the Society for Theatre Research. Her forthcoming monograph will soon be published by Cambridge Scholars Publishing in early 2026. We'll be watching a paper, a material titled "The Culture of Semiotics, Opera as a Synchronous Practice." I suggest we may begin.
Hello. Today, I will explore the concept of the topos as it applies to opera and topic theory in musicology. I will argue that topoi are thematic triggers that operate conceptually and effectively, shaping operatic narratives and audience experience. I'll also address the common confusion between topos and trope and explain why this distinction matters for interpretation and staging. This talk is an attempt to bring together several disciplines: classical rhetoric, literary theory, music semiotics, and performance studies. By doing this, I want to show that topoi are not simply musicological tools, but powerful cultural and interpretive frameworks that help us understand how opera continues to make meaning for audiences. I'll be drawing on thinkers from Aristotle to Hatton and Agawu, and looking at a concrete case study, Dido's Lament, from Henry Purcell and Naum Tate's Dido and Aeneas, to see how this theory works in practice. My hope is that you leave with a clearer sense of how topoi operate and why they matter in today's opera houses. In this talk, I reinterpret Dido and Aeneas as a work that exists not as a fixed text, but as a continuous act of translation. Rather than seeking a single authentic version or meaning, I treat the opera as a dynamic system of reconfigured signification, where meaning is produced through its successive transformations between languages, media, and historical contexts. Dido and Aeneas has always occupied a paradoxical position in English musical culture. On the one hand, it is a small-scale, school opera, probably first performed at Josiah Priest's Chelsea Academy around 1689. On the other hand, it has achieved iconic status. Dido's Lament is now performed annually at the Cenotaph as an emblem of collective mourning. This duality, private pedagogical exercise and national ritual, already points to a work that translates between social functions, aesthetic registers, and affective worlds. In what follows, I develop a theoretical model grounded in translation, semiotics, and the theory of topoi. I argue that Dido is written in two interdependent languages, textual and musical, each shaped by the rhetorical, allegorical, and affective codes of late 17th century culture. Its meaning, I suggest, lies not in the recovery of an original artifact, but in the processes of interpretation, mediation, and performance through which it continually renews itself. What is a topos? I define topoi as abstract nouns that dominate the libretto: fate, destiny, love, death. These are then musically represented. Importantly, topoi engage an audience on a conceptual level. They stimulate emotional and intellectual response, rather than simply appealing to the senses. Instead of dismissing them as cliches, we should view them as shared cultural reference points. This means that when we encounter a topos like death, we are not just dealing with a narrative event, but with a network of cultural associations that audiences recognize, allowing the topos to act as a shortcut to meaning. It's also worth stressing that topoi can be historically specific. The way an audience in 1689 understood grief might not be identical to how we understand it today. That is part of what makes their study so fascinating. They are both fixed and fluid at the same time. But why distinguish topos from trope? The distinction between topos and trope is critical. A topos names a shared theme, fate, love, death, for example, whereas a trope elaborates or transforms that theme, offering a new interpretive layer. In performance studies, this helps us differentiate between a work's thematic content and what a particular staging chooses to do with that content. When critics conflate the two, they risk missing the specificity of what is happening in a particular performance. A trope is not simply another topos, it is a reinterpretation, a way of bending or stretching the commonplace into something fresh. This keeps opera alive and responsive to changing cultural needs. This distinction also protects against overgeneralization. Saying that an opera is about love is not enough. We must ask, what kind of love? Is it dutiful, erotic, forbidden, or tragic? Does the production under discussion reaffirm or challenge that topos through tropic intervention? While topic theory and semiotics have provided invaluable tools, they also impose limits. Traditional semiotic analysis often assumes a fixed relationship between signifier and signified, treating musical meaning as a closed system. But Dido and Aeneas resists such closure. Following post-structuralist thought, meaning here is deferred and plural. The lament, for instance, can signify resignation, transcendence, or political allegory, depending on the interpretive frame. Structuralism's emphasis on internal consistency must therefore yield to a contextual hermeneutics, one that recognizes performance, reception, and ideology as co-authors of meaning. In this sense, Dido and Aeneas illustrates the movement from langue to parole, to borrow Saussure's terms, from the system of musical and rhetorical conventions to their individual enunciations in specific performances. Each new production, whether historically informed, feminist, or cinematic, constitutes a parole that reactivates the work's semiotic potential. Aristotle's Topica describes topoi as places from which arguments are discovered. They are grounded in shared knowledge, what Aristotle calls endoxa, and are meant to be persuasive and culturally recognizable. This is important because it tells us that topoi are fundamentally about communication and intelligibility. The classical rhetorical framework reminds us that topoi are inherently collective. They work because audiences already know how to respond. They are not private symbols, but public commonplaces. By retrieving this rhetorical heritage, we can reframe musicological topic theory as not just a taxonomy of stylistic devices, but as a set of persuasive tools, a way composers and librettists guide audiences toward particular emotional and intellectual responses. Leonard Ratner introduced the term topic to musicology, identifying stylistic and functional types, such as dances, marches, or hunting calls. Alan Brooke extended this by linking them to social settings. Agawu broadened the framework by adding a language model, but we must be cautious. Fixing topics too rigidly risks missing the multiple meanings they can generate across different contexts. Alan Brooke's work was especially important in showing that topics were socially grounded. A minuet was not just a dance form, it conjured images of ballroom etiquette and aristocratic refinement. This opens the door for reading operatic topoi as embedded in networks of cultural meaning. Agawu's universe of topics shows us just how expansive the system can be. But the challenge is always to avoid treating them as static symbols. Context, historical, cultural, performative, remains key. To speak of translation, in Dido and Aeneas, is to question the very notion of a musical work. As Lydia Gurr argued, the concept of the work as an autonomous entity is a product of 19th century ideology. In Purcell's time, music was a performative art, inseparable from occasion and context. Seen through this lens, Dido exists only as a series of events of translation, the inscription of text into music, the transmission of manuscript into performance, the reinterpretation of score into stage, the transformation of early modern allegory into modern emotional realism. This performative ontology aligns with Nicholas Cook's conception of the work as performance. Each enactment recreates rather than reproduces the opera, generating new constellations of meaning. Translation, then, is not a secondary act, but the condition of the work's existence. Music semiotics helps us see that topoi are signs, but they are never fixed. Natiaz reminds us that musical meaning is polysemic. open to multiple interpretations. Hatton calls topics emergent entities that take shape only within context. Post-structuralism reinforces this. Meaning is never final, but historically situated and always up for negotiation. When we study a topos, we are really studying a process of meaning-making. It is not simply about decoding a symbol, but about understanding how signs operate dynamically within a performance. Opera is especially rich because music, text, staging, and gesture all interact. Each can reinforce or contradict the others, producing complex semiotic layers, which is why a synthetic approach, combining structural and hermeneutic analysis, is so valuable. We can read an opera synchronically, asking what it means right now in its current staging, or diachronically, looking at how its meanings have shifted over time. Saussure's long parole distinction is helpful here. The opera's score is the long, its underlying system. But every performance is a parole, a new utterance that slightly alters meaning. The double lens is crucial for scholars and practitioners. It allows us to respect historical context without being trapped by it. We can understand how Dido and Aeneas might have functioned in Restoration England, while also asking what it can mean for us today. Indeed, each new production is a kind of argument about the work. It selects, emphasizes, and sometimes contests the topoi it inherits. This is why opera remains a living art form. To understand the opera's semiotic logic, we must situate it within the humanist educational culture that shaped both Tate and Purcell. Translation was central to 17th century pedagogy, not simply as linguistic exercise, but as moral and interpretive training. Erasmus had promoted the reading of classical texts as a means of ethical formation, transforming pagan myth into Christian moral exemplum. Tate's Dido exemplifies this humanist habit of translation. His adaptation of Virgil's Aeneid and Ovid's Heroides reframes the myth as an allegory of divine providence and moral choice. Fate and destiny become instruments of moral instruction. Dido's tragedy warns against the disorder of passion, while Aeneas's departure signals obedience to higher calling. Purcell's music performs a parallel translation. His musico-rhetorical devices, chromaticism for grief, major-minor oscillation for conflict, suspensions for hesitation, transform textual allegory into effective experience. Thus, the opera enacts a dialogue between moral allegory and emotional immediacy, mirroring the pedagogical ideals of its age. Let's consider Dido's Lament as a case study. The descending chromatic line is a centuries-old musical symbol of lament, while the unyielding ground bass gives a sense of fate and inevitability. Modern stagings often reframe this moment, for instance, presenting Dido as a victim of patriarchal oppression or as a political martyr. These are tropic reinterpretations of the topos of death. The case study demonstrates how music and text can either align or contradict one another. Sometimes a director might stage the final scene ironically, undermining the pathos of the music to provoke critical reflection. Modern directors use topoi as raw material for reinterpretation. Audiences are not passive. they bring their own cultural frameworks, which interact with staging choices to produce meaning. This is why topoi remain relevant. They can be reactivated and renegotiated in each new performance. This is especially evident in politically charged productions. For example, staging Dido's death as a metaphor for the collapse of empire completely changes the meaning of the topos. In this sense, topoi act as sites of cultural negotiation. They become places where society can rehearse, question, and reimagine its values. The persistent vitality of Dido and Aeneas, from 17th century Masque to 21st century Regi Theatre, demonstrates how its topoi have remained active precisely because they are mutable carriers of meaning. Each historical moment reconfigures their signification through changing tropoi. The post-war revival translated Dido's lament into national mourning. The feminist reinterpretations of the 1970s revoiced her fate as resistance to patriarchal destiny. Contemporary productions reimagine love and death through filmic and multimedia languages. In each case, the opera's semiotic and allegorical framework remains recognizable, yet its expressive devices, the tropoi, shift to accommodate new sensibilities. Thus, Dido and Aeneas exemplifies what I term reconfigured signification, the perpetual renewal of meaning through acts of translation. The work endures, not because it remains the same, but because it continually changes intelligibly. To conclude, topoi are not tied clichés, but conceptual triggers that give shape to operatic narratives. Using semiotics and rhetoric together allows us to appreciate both the structural and contextual dimensions of opera. Every staging reactivates these topoi, making them relevant for new audiences and new times. In other words, the study of topoi is ultimately the study of how meaning travels across centuries, across stagings, across audiences. It is a way of listening and looking that foregrounds both continuity and change. I hope this talk encourages you to notice topoi in your own listening and theatre going, and to think critically about how they are being used, transformed, and reinvented in the stagings you see and hear. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry I can't answer any questions.
Okay, we've come to an end of the presentation, and as far as I can see, Miss Edna Hollywell is connected, so I hope we can have her, yes, on the screen to welcome her and say hello. So, hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you very much for being with us. We all enjoyed watching your pre-recorded presentation. I'm just looking at the hall, and there are some questions. So, yeah, do we need a microphone? Professor Violetta Kostka from Academy of Music in Gdańsk. And then we have another one. So, yeah. Okay.
Thank you for your paper. It was very interesting. I caught many interesting ideas in your speech, but one is very, very important. The meaning culturally negotiated. Yes, it was on the example of Dido and Eneasz, but could you say something more about it, about this phenomenon?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. I think what I mean by that comes back to the idea that interpretation is fluid and contextual. So when the work was written in the late 17th century, there were various historical events that might have been reflected in the libretto, particularly, and the choice of libretto subject. So as the work transited through the centuries, it was renegotiated according to the dominant culture within which it was presented through stagings. So that's also connected to the synchronic and diachronic. The immediate performances or stagings that we see in the 21st century are the result of consistent cultural renegotiation through time. That's the point I was trying to make.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess we have another question, this time from Dr. Julian Helabai, also from United Kingdom.
Yes, thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating talk. I was particularly interested in your idea of the topics being very malleable and open to reinterpretation, carrying changing meanings across time, which I absolutely, totally accept. However, I'm wondering if, for example, the chromatic descending bass of When I Am Laid in Earth, which has always had this connotation of grief, whether one can say that even though to each successive generation they can interpret it in their own way, there is this a word that's sometimes raised in connection with topic 3, which is isotopy, whether the isotopy of grief is a continuum.
Yes, I wouldn't argue with that, certainly. But I think my point was about staging and regitheatre and how the passus stereosculus, which is what's used within the descending chromatic line, which we can say represents grief. That's Ellen Rosand, that was her work. Yes, we can accept, because it's conventional, that that is an emblem of grief, but regitheatre is so malleable, as you said, and individualistic, that a director may somehow find a way to manipulate that into a different or trope, make it function as a trope, so he's actually, or he or she is actually not representing the topos of grief, but is actually troping on it somehow. Yeah, even though it has the conventional musico-rhetorical device within it, sorry, because staging is a combination of music, text, and costume, sound, lighting, and all the other things. So it's multifaceted. It's not as simplistic as a straight topos representation.
Yes, absolutely. I was just thinking when you were talking about a director might choose to completely reinterpret that scene and present it in a very different way. I mean, however, having said that, even if somehow or other the director manages to interpret it as some kind of comedy, even so, the grief topos is not lost because we've got irony.
Yes. and actually, I'm just really... It's a kind of a minority argument, because that lament is so powerful and so strong and so universally recognised. It's actually an emblem of universal lament for fallen soldiers. Every year it's played on Remembrance Sunday by a brass band in the UK, and it's known for its pathos and its connotation. So really, I'm just stretching a point a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm just looking if there's anybody else that would like to say a comment. I think no. So, Miss Hollywell, thank you very much for being there. It was a pleasure to connect with you. Thank you very much for your contribution. You can still remain with us because we have one more speaker, and we are just very slightly behind the time. Yeah, let's have a big applause. And now, please let me invite the last speaker of this session and the last speaker of the whole conference, our good colleague from New York. Please let me welcome Dr. Matthew Leone. I can see that he's waving his hand at us. I hope that just in a second we'll be seeing him on the screen. So, hello, Matthew.
Hello there. Good to hear from you all. I'm very sorry I cannot be there in person, but I'm very glad to see the new facility. I'm glad to see the new assembly hall, and I'm very much looking forward to visiting at some point in the near future. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all.
Yeah, hello. So now you had just a little bit of the glance of the audience of the room following your paper, and now you can see me as I think. So please let me just tell you that Matthew's been there twice, coming from New York. So we've established this kind of scientific connection, and let me just present you briefly. Dr. Matthew Leone is a musicologist from Long Island, New York. He's a graduate of Indiana University's Jacobs School of Music, where he earned his master's and his PhD. His primary research interests include historical constructs, reception, 19th century music criticism, and music and musicians as historical icons. Dr. Matthew Leone has presented papers at several conferences in North America and Europe, and he has published dozens of articles, essays, program notes, and reviews for music-related publications since 2010. Currently, he's working on a monograph about the pianist-composer Jan Ladisław Dusek's legacy in the 19th century. Please let me add that Jan Ladisław Dusek was present in Matthew's two previous papers, but today I can see we have a completely different theme. So let me introduce it. Lessons from the long 19th century, new technologies, threats to human agency, and the persistent value of human creativity.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my PowerPoint real quick. Make sure that everything is in order. I will go to slideshow. All right. Can you all hear me? Can you all see the PowerPoint? Is everything all right? All right. Looks good. Okay. Thank you all very much. Please bear with me if I'm coughing a little bit as well. I'm just getting over a little bit of a head cold, but very glad to be presenting again. In recent years, critics and artists across mediums have been addressing the disruptive impact of digital technology on the production, consumption, and dissemination of artistic works, with particular focus on AI generators such as DALL-E and Suno. Debates over AI-generated art have fallen along several tracks, with questions surrounding its monetary value, claims of authorship or ownership, or whether or not it is even a true artistic creation. Fundamentally, however, generative AI has also stirred issues of how new technology can influence the value of an artistic work. Is aesthetic value enhanced or diminished on account of technology's presence, or does it depend on how it is used to shape the final product? Moreover, is the value of an artistic creator diminished or even destroyed when the technology is putting in the bulk of the creative effort? Unsurprisingly, the sudden and explosive usage of digital art generators has unsettled professional artists of all kinds around the world, with many of them arguing that human creation contains an inherent, even sacred quality that is missing in machine-generated art, and therefore cannot and should not cede to it. In an interview less than 2 weeks ago, the renowned director James Cameron denounced the prospect of AI-generated actors replacing human performers as a twofold loss. On the one hand, it represented the loss of the special experience of passionate individuals making a film together, and on the other hand, it represented the loss of his own livelihood as a director, with the implication that a computer cannot replicate the technique that he has spent a lifetime learning and refining. Now you've got generative AI, he says, where they can make up a character, they can make up an actor, they can make up a performance from scratch with a text prompt. It's like, no, that's horrifying to me. That's the opposite. That's exactly what we're not doing as filmmakers. I don't want a computer doing what I pride myself on being able to do with actors. I don't want to replace actors. I love working with actors. Similarly, Akshita Agarwal, the director of the Bruno Art Gallery in Delhi, India, views AI art as an insult to the years of discipline and work required to become a master at one's craft. The idea behind our gallery is to honor the years of practice, skill, and creativity that artists put into their work. AI skips over that deeply human process. While the future is uncertain, one can understand Cameron's and Agarwal's anxieties in light of the recent success of computer-generated works. The works of Boto, an autonomous AI artist created by the German programmer Mario Klingemann, have fetched over $5 million through auctions since 2021. And Klingemann himself has expressed optimism that generators like his will be the way of the future. The recent advancements in artificial intelligence, deep learning, and data analysis make me confident that in the near future, machine artists will create more interesting work than humans. As unsettling as these developments may seem, it is important to recognize that these anxieties over the role of innovative technology in artistic creation are not new. Machine-generated art and music have existed for over 250 years, and countless artists, composers, and critics have wrestled with these same issues over that time span. Additionally, several 19th century figures who confronted what could be considered the predecessors of AI art generators, automata, mechanical instruments, and early recording technology, have provided an abundance of insightful and compelling arguments on behalf of the value of human-made art. Taken in sum, these criticisms demonstrate a remarkable tenacity and ongoing drive to promote the products of human creativity and effort. And they also provide useful ways to understand human-made art's complex relationships with technology that are still relevant today. If we are destined to confront the disruptive impact of DALL-E, history has given us plenty of ways to do so. In the late 18th century and throughout the 19th century, several automata and other androids captured the imagination of viewers across Europe and North America. Though primitive in comparison to modern AI generators, they ultimately operated on the same set of principles. These were human-made machines capable of performing tasks, such as writing, playing music, and using complex sets of cam cylinders and other mechanisms. They were capable of producing exceptionally detailed results. More advanced automata contained thousands of internal moving parts, carefully arranged to produce specific sequences of movements, and in many ways they can be considered forerunners of computer programs. Moreover, the makers of these automata strove to make them look authentic. These were more than just machines, but synthetic counterparts to humans. The three automata produced by the Jacques-Droz family in the early 1770s were among the most famous and extraordinary early examples of art-producing machines. The writer, the draftsman, and the musician were fully functional androids. When activated, they could create several different highly detailed, pre-programmed artworks, depending on the adjustment of the internal mechanisms. The exceptional craftsmanship and lifelike features captivated the attention of viewers throughout Europe. The musician, for example, moves her head from side to side, following her hands on the keys, and internal bellows imitate human breathing. And here's just a little close-up of some of the gears in the draftsman. You can see this is extraordinarily complicated clockwork combined with some incredibly intricate mechanisms. A generation later, Friedrich Kaufmann's trumpet player attained similar notoriety. Through an elaborate set of brass drums, wind valves, and spring mechanisms, it was capable of playing two notes simultaneously as well as long melodies. In the ensuing decades, several other inventors continued to push the boundaries of automata technology. Joseph Faber's android Euphonia, showcased in Philadelphia in 1845 and a year later in London, was among the many attempts from the era to create a machine capable of speaking and singing. Using a control panel with 16 keys, an operator could adjust the synthetic lips, jaw, and tongue of Euphonia's face to articulate distinct syllables and pitches, while a set of bellows and reeds provided the foundational sound. And you can see, even from the hair, there is a deliberate attempt to make this a human kind of figure. As one may expect, the reactions to these automata were often a mixture of wonder, awe, and discomfort. Upon viewing Jacques Attraw's Musician in London in 1776, one spectator commented, "She is apparently agitated with an anxiety and diffidence not always felt in real life. Her eyes then seem intent on the notes. Her bosom heaves." Writing in his memoirs in 1895, the London theatre manager John Hollingshead recalled his unsettling encounter with Faber's Euphonia years earlier, with special attention given to the unnatural closeness between the machine and its inventor and the disturbing effect of the machine itself. He especially emphasizes this latter point by likening Faber's invention to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein monster, a horrific attempt to build an artificial being. He states, "I have no doubt that Faber slept in the same room as his figure, his scientific Frankenstein monster, and I felt the secret influence of an idea that the two were destined to live and die together. One keyboard, touched by the professor, produced words which, slowly and deliberately, in a hoarse sepulchral voice, came from the mouth of the figure, as if from the depths of a tomb." Other commentators channeled their anxieties into humor, satirizing the 19th century vogue for automata while hinting at an underlying fear that these mechanical beings might supplant human artistic creators. J.J. Granville's 1844 comic novel Un Autre Monde, for instance, features depictions of the Steam Concert, in which an orchestra and a choir of steam-powered android musicians perform works such as The Explosion, a melody for 200 trombones, and The Locomotive, a low-pressure symphony with 200 horsepower. Not only are these compositions far beyond the capabilities of human musicians, Granville whimsically points out another advantage over their human counterparts. As machines, they are capable of both superior precision and durability. Thanks to this admirable invention, we need no longer worry about singers catching a cold, coming down with bronchitis, or losing their voice. The steam-powered instruments produce effects of surprising accuracy. The great composers of the age have finally found interpreters equal to their melodies. In this century of progress, the machine is a perfected human being. Although these automata produced considerable anxieties, they also forced 19th century artists and critics to devise strategies to reassert the value of human creation even more forcefully. In many ways, their arguments are still applicable to today's most recent developments. A common counter-argument involved emphasizing the human qualities that went beyond a machine's capabilities. Unlike an automaton, humans possessed individual idiosyncrasies, the ability to vary and develop one's style, and the capacity to go beyond mechanical imitation and programming. In short, they have the ability to seek out new innovative modes of expression that take on an unquantifiable, even spiritual essence. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel forcefully articulates this viewpoint in the introduction of his Aesthetics, entitled The Work of Art as a Product of Human Activity. He states, "For what one man makes, another, it may seem, could make or imitate too, if only he were first acquainted with the matter of proceeding. But what can be carried out on such directions can only be something formally regular and mechanical." In opposition to this, Hegel contends shortly later that beauty and creation must move beyond fixed sets of rules and established conventions. In his mind, engaging our minds and activating our ideas comes out most vividly when such prescriptions do not limit themselves to the purely external and mechanical, but extend to the significant and spiritual activity of the artist. One can also see this argument manifest very strongly in diatribes against virtuoso performers and composers in the 1840s. For many critics, virtuoso symbolized an artistic tragedy. By prioritizing technical perfection, they had literally transformed into machines at the expense of their minds, hearts, souls, and creative functions. Writing in 1843 for the Augsburger Gazette, Heinrich Heine lamented, "This prevalence of piano playing and also the triumph of the piano virtuoso are characteristic of our time and all actually testify to the victory of mechanical engineering over the mind. The technical skill, the precision of a robot, the identification of the performer with strung wood, the transformation of a man into an instrument of sound are all now praised and exalted on high." Shortly later, however, Heine suggests that virtuoso violinists are less inclined to lose their humanity due to the closer connections between their instrument, technique, and their very soul. At the same time, he still warns that a violinist must let their human qualities flourish, lest they become sober and heartless and autonomate themselves. The violin is an instrument where fast human whims are in sympathetic union with the mood of the player, so to speak. The slightest discomfort, the smallest outpouring of the mind, a touch of feeling, we find an immediate echo. And this probably happens because the violin, so close to our chest, also hears our heartbeats. However, this is only the case with artists who truly carry a beating heart in their chest, who actually have a soul. The more sober and heartless the violin player, the more uniform his execution becomes. But this vaunted security is only the outcome of mental narrowness. One of the most extraordinary and vitriolic criticisms against machine art can be found in the 1906 article, The Menace of Mechanical Music, written by the famous American bandleader, Jean-Philippe Sousa. Rather than a reaction to automata, Sousa instead singles out the phonograph and other new recording technologies as existential threats to music itself. Echoing the criticisms of Hegel and Heine, Sousa contends that the phonograph effectively strips music of its inherent human value and reduces a living, thriving art form into a mechanical game. Notably, Sousa draws similar battle lines between genuine, soulful human creation and the inherently inferior mechanical imitation. From the days when the mathematical and mechanical were paramount in music, the struggle has been bitter and incessant for the sway of the emotional and the soulful. And now, in this, the 20th century, come these talking and playing machines and offer again to reduce the expression of music to a mathematical system of megaphones, wheels, cogs, discs, and cylinders, and all manner of revolving things, which are like real art as the marble statue of Eve is like to her beautiful, living, breathing daughters. Nevertheless, Sousa's diatribe also invokes a different anxiety that will most certainly recall criticisms of AI-generated art today. When music is so easily reproduced, composers cease to have value as the owners of their own creation. And while Sousa would eventually benefit from later copyright laws, such protections were by no means certain in 1906. Like the artists today who find their work absorbed and reworked through AI generators, Sousa too worried about losing control of both his compositions and his livelihood, an outcome which, in effect, would devalue him both as an artist and a person. The music now produced so widely by the mechanical players of every sort draw no profit from it whatsoever. Composers are entirely unprotected by the copyright laws of the United States, as at present written on the statute books and interpreted by the courts. The composer of the most popular waltz or march of the year must see it seized, reproduced at will on wax cylinder, brass disc, or strip of perforated paper, multiplied indefinitely, and sold at large profit all over the country without a penny of remuneration to himself for the use of this original product of his brain. With a long view of history behind us, we can safely assert that many of the worst fears felt by Hegel, Heine, Sousa, and countless others did not come to fruition. New copyright laws have protected musicians in the wake of the phonograph and other recording technology, and human musical creation, whether live performance, original composition, or even remixing existing music, have not been replaced by automata. But today, when it is far easier to generate art and music through mechanical means, a question still remains. Can a work of art created by a human possess a special kind of value that an AI-generated piece is incapable of possessing? I would like to conclude by saying yes, but for a different reason than those stated in the above commentaries. Like humans, machines are capable of learning by being programmed with existing information. And in many ways, an AI generator like DALL-E is a far more advanced version of a Jacques-Drozd draftsman. When prompted with the command, both machines will produce a work of art by drawing on information stored in their memory. But while DALL-E and the draftsman can mechanically reproduce existing data, they are ultimately unable to recognize why they are reproducing it or how they might do it differently. In other words, all of these machines lack exclusively human qualities, cognizance, self-awareness, agency. A human artist may reproduce what already exists and adhere to convention, but they also may choose to subvert or alter those conventions as they see fit. This capacity, in turn, opens up countless possibilities for meaning, new modes of expression, audience engagement, and directed effect that even the most advanced AI or machine cannot accomplish. To return briefly to the draftsman, Jacques-Drozd had programmed this autonoma to produce several different drawings depending on the adjustment of the internal mechanisms. A dog, Cupid in a chariot, and in anticipation of a showing for Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, portraits of the king and queen. It was reported, however, that when the draftsman was activated to draw Marie Antoinette's face, it accidentally produced the dog instead. Under these circumstances, there are but a limited number of explanations for this outcome. Either the camshafts were incorrectly adjusted, or the operator input the wrong command, or the machine itself was malfunctioning. But if one imagines a human artist in place of the draftsman, a whole new set of explanations becomes available. The artist may have drawn the dog as a political protest or for humorous effect. A human artist would also not be limited to a pre-programmed template of a dog like seen here. They could choose from any number of breeds in any number of poses, or even draw it wearing the queen's favorite dress. Regardless of the outcome, the bottom line is clear. A human artist can not only envision these possibilities, but actively choose which ones to execute and how to execute them. In a similar vein, we can also consider the musical wit of Joseph Haydn and the finale of his well-known joke quartet. As one might expect, this movement features many conventions of its era. The tuneful melody, technical proficiency, clear rondo structure, and logical harmonic progressions can be found in countless other string quartets of the time. But Haydn's quartet bears a special value in part due to the clever originality of its ending, which is achieved through several deliberate creative choices on the composer's part. Although Haydn subverts audience expectations by altering the final statement of the theme, the ending's effectiveness lies in how he alters it. Introducing full measure pauses, marked here in red, between the theme's four phrases, marked here in green, this already leaves the audience in suspense, but the composer still takes things a step further. Highlighted in blue here, a three-measure pause after the final phrase, on a perfect authentic cadence, tricks the audience into thinking the piece is over. Unexpectedly, only for Haydn to surprise the listener with one final pianissimo statement of the first phrase, unexpectedly concluding the work with an imperfect authentic cadence. In sum, Haydn's ending is not only the result of his agency, but it also reflects his keen understanding of expectations, how to subvert them, and how to do so in a way that he knew his audience would appreciate. And I'll quickly play this ending here. While the future impacts of AI-generated art are still unknown, This brief survey of 19th century reactions to new technologies makes it clear that our current anxieties have a long history of precedence. Just as anxiety and uncertainty in the face of innovations have persisted over the last 2 centuries, the continued advocacy of the human value of creativity in the face of those innovations has been equally persistent, if not more so. But if there is any irony to our current predicament, it is that we may be fighting the same battles over and over and over again. When James Cameron was asked, again, just less than 2 weeks ago, if he was concerned about AI replacing his work, his reply seemingly echoed back 2 centuries. And please tell me if this is a little familiar. What generative AI can't do is create something new that's never been seen. If you think about it, the models are trained on everything that's ever been done before that. It can't be trained on that which has never been done before. So you will innately see, essentially, all of human art and human experience put into a blender, and you'll get something that is kind of an average of that. So what you can't have is that individual screenwriter's unique lived experience and their quirks. You won't find the idiosyncrasies of a particular actor. If all of this sounds familiar, I understand why it does. And to conclude, at the risk of repeating an oft-repeated cliche, history doesn't repeat itself, but it also rhymes. Thank you for your time.
You for showing us what I would call really a collection of fascinating examples and for bringing up this very up-to-date subject of the role of technology. Please let me open the discussion. Do we have any questions, any remarks? I don't see any raised hands. Maybe let me start. We have one person at the audience, so yes, please let us give the microphone to Professor Marcin Simela from Academy of Music in Katowice.
Oh, thank you for this presentation. I don't know if this is a question, perhaps a remark. There is also a positive side of automaton. There is a wonderful, famous essay by Heinrich von Kleist über Marionettentheater, on the marionette theater, and he says that these dolls, they have a grace. This is the key word. They have a grace because they have no intention. They are just let things happen, and no living person is able to move with such a grace. A kind of amor fati, or how you call it, yes. This is just the positive thing of being an automaton. And I wonder if you perhaps have found some other example of this kind.
Of automata?
Of automaton, which are considered to be a positive, to have a positive feature from which we could learn as human.
There is a very fascinating story by E.T.A. Hoffmann called The Automaton, which is an extraordinarily rich and very layered story where the android takes on an almost spiritual dimension, or what is this singer who is perceived to be an android takes on a spiritual dimension. And this is an interesting case where the technology itself is transportative and allows people into a realm that you would never think existed. And there's a magnificent scene towards the end where the characters are walking through this kind of, it's a forest of musical instruments, mechanical musical instruments, and they comment on the surreal experience they're feeling, but something that is beyond this world. And you're absolutely right to point out that this interest in technology has very mixed reactions. There is an uncanny quality to these automata and the technology in general, but there are many who recognize that the mechanisms themselves can enhance art in some extraordinary ways. Perhaps no one more than Richard Wagner in his Bayreuth experiments. He was fully cognizant of the mechanical technology that could realize the transformation scene in Parsifal. And he went through an extraordinary amount of effort creating these kind of rolling backgrounds to carry out the transformation. But he was so adamant about keeping it invisible. So there's a magic to the technology as long as you don't see the technology, as long as you don't see what's going on behind the surface, it can be a magical experience. And that is, it's a very important point, and I thank you for raising it, yes.
Okay, thank you very much for such an explanation. I can see that we have another question from Dr. Judith Romero from Mexico.
Hello, thank you for this fascinating presentation. And when you talk about expectations, I immediately thought about when we hear some kind of music, we have expectation, accomplished expectations. And I think AI regurgitate, you know, all the music online, and this is a regurgitate all this kind of music. So I think this is the value of human being creativity, you know. But I don't know what you think about. Is AI some kind of creativity? I have this doubt, but I don't think so. But it's only a machine which regurgitates all online. So I don't know. This is my first question. I forgot my second question, but this is for me. It's important. You know, I think Julian talked about the education. And all our education is about our expectation as a public and as a musician. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think you're right when you say the word regurgitate. The word regurgitate and also the word blender have become very prominent. Even there was a story about 6 or 7 years ago. It was an early AI program that was trying to replicate a classical sonata, and the person listening to it mentioned it sounded like Beethoven in a blender, because it was getting the basic fragments of the musical phrasing right, but not organizing them in a logical sequence, because the machine is not capable of understanding what the audience expects or what you can do to subvert those expectations. Beethoven, in particular, was extraordinary at this, and I was hoping to put it in, but I ran out of time. The Fifth Symphony is maybe one of the most extraordinary examples of subverting expectations, because the third movement is the scherzo movement, ABA, opening A section, French horns have the theme. It's a fanfare. Recapitulation, pizzicato strings, very understated. And then, just when you think the piece is ending, it immediately catapults into the fourth movement. And not only catapults, but it's C major, full complement of brass. And then even in the fourth movement, there's a brief recollection of the scherzo. So these are all extremely calculated decisions that are playing with expectations. We get the return of the theme in the scherzo, but in a very unexpected way. So there's a real balance and a real cognizance of how to pull this off that a machine model simply cannot do because it does not have the awareness to do so.
This is a problem with the awareness in machines. And I remember my second question. My second question is in positive side of AI. Do you think it could be a dialogue between, I retook your example of the actor, a dialogical exchange between human and machine generated by AI could be interesting for you?
Yes, and I'm glad you pointed that out. You just made me think of a particular interview. Let me see if I could find it, because this is a more pragmatic approach, as it were. This is from Vaishnavi Murali, an art gallery operator, also in India. Points out that AI doesn't create in a vacuum. There's always human imagination guiding it, someone deciding, refining, shaping. If an artist uses AI as a tool to push the boundaries of their vision, then the creativity still belongs to them. So in this case, AI can be a means of experimenting with different forms of expression. You plug in different parameters, see what comes out, and then you react accordingly. So it absolutely can be a dialogue in that way, and you're absolutely right, and other artists have commented on this as well.
Okay, thank you very much for this discussion. I'm just checking if we have any other questions, any other remarks. It's just the last moment we can have a discussion or ask Dr. Alona a question. I can see no, maybe let me have the last one as a reward for me being the chairman today. I was just thinking about the issue of AI, even if we agree that if it cannot really duplicate the originality, the subtleness of human-made art, maybe there are some ways, I think you already referred to that a little bit, maybe there are some ways in which AI-generated art still have some kind of value or different values maybe?
I would definitely say it has different values as a sort of product of the algorithm itself. If a work of art is a reflection of some of the tendencies and tastes of the artist, the human artist, then an AI generator can reflect the parameters of programming. And it's extraordinary seeing at times how the art form created by AI has evolved, where the same parameters put into the same machine over the course of 2 or 3 years produces more refined results, more detailed results. It can be incredible to see as a marker of technology and technological advancement, to see just how far it can come. It would be, in some ways, I think, the equivalent of comparing a video game from the 1990s to the late 1990s to the early aughts to later on, and seeing the same video game kind of progressing through the advanced technology and seeing, oh, it's the same basic thing. It's the same basic characters and setting and music. But with this new technology, it exemplifies how the technology advances. So certainly that way.
Okay, thank you very much for this explanation. I think also shows us some more possible points for reflection and discussion. I guess I need to wrap it up at this point. So, Matthew, thank you one more time for being here with us. Let's have some applause for your presentation.
Thank you, Malvina. Thank you all very, very much for having me.
And I guess that's time to finish the last session. So thank you very much for being there. And I guess I will ask Professor Anna Nowak to close the conference.
The conference now is drawing the conference now is drawing to a close, so it is time to sum up and to give you some information. The International Conference Music, as in the world of values and meanings, is being held for the first time in the new building of our academy. So it was a significant moment in the activities of our faculty and our department, Theory of Music. Therefore, we thank all of participants for accepting our invitations. Thanks to your participation, the conference has become an important scholarly event. The presented concepts of analysis and interpretation of the values and meanings of music, in particular the issues of heteronomy and hybridity of musical works,
musical milieu as places for creative activities, music as reality of symbolic norms and structures, and music as a medium of values and meanings, these issues were important, inspiring, and deeply moving. The presented lectures are important documents of the research undertaken, so we would like to record them in the form of electronic publication. Therefore, we please submit your presentation text by January 15th. Detailed information will be sent to you in separate mail. I would also like to thank the chairman of the leading the proceedings. Thanks to your involvement, thanks to your activity, the discussions that followed the presentations provided valuable commentary on the topics presented. Organizing the conference is a team effort, so I would like to extend my sincere thanks to all the faculty staff involved in preparing the conference. In particular, I would like to thank the Dean of the faculty. I would also like to thank the conference committee, especially the secretary of the committee, Dr. Malwina Marciniak, Dr. Manuel Dominguez Salas, Dr. Marcin Simela, Dr. Master of Art Paweł Pura and Przemysław Czarnecki, who were responsible for our live streaming, and Master of Art Monika Biesaga. Thank you, all of you. And I believe that the Dean and the head of the Department of the Music Theory will agree with me that we will continue the tradition of our conferences and invite you to the next one next year. So thank you, all of you. Thank you once more.